Hey, and welcome to a very special edition of the Vergecast. Tonight, the jury has come back with their verdict in the Apple versus Samsung case, and we're here to discuss it live, and it's actually still unfolding. I'm Josh Topolsky, of course, and with me now is David Pierce in the studio. Hello. And there he is right there. And we have Matt McCary on the phone, one of our legal experts. On Skype. There you are. And also Ross Miller, our senior editor, who is currently in Georgia right now.
And that's not a picture. That's actually video.
That's actually live video of Ross right now. He's covering this live from. We wanted to get the southern. What's the southern take on this? And so we have it. But
sweet tea.
Anyhow, Nilay Patel will be joining us in a little bit. He's actually still covering this as it happens. So let me just give you if you guys don't know, and I don't know how you possibly found this broadcast and are listening to it if you don't know what's going on, but the jury came back today to deliver their verdict in the Apple versus Samsung case. They deliberated for just about 22 hours, and which is a very short amount of time. I think the general perception here is that it's a very short amount of time for this jury to deliberate. They came back after about 22 hours of deliberation, said that they had a verdict, and they found predominantly in favor of Apple in this case. There are a couple of, as of right now, there are a couple of issues with the verdict form, and so we're going to hear a little bit more on that. Samsung has issued a statement, which I'll read in a minute. But right now, I want to get Matt, who is intimately familiar with with what this verdict means, and sort of can break it down for us. Matt, can you tell everybody? Can you tell me what does this mean? What actually happened here? Where did they find for Apple? Where did they not find for Apple? And what ultimately is the breakdown? And I just want to add one more thing: is that the jury has awarded damages to Apple right now of $1.051 billion and change, which is short of the I believe it was $2.25 billion that could have been.
That's right.
Maximum amount of damages that could have been awarded. So Matt, can you tell us what is the verdict? Break down the verdict for us. What did we see about an hour ago? What does it really mean? Hold on, we don't have audio on Matt. Matt, hang on one second. We don't have audio.
That was my fault. Sorry.
There we go. Stop muting yourself. Okay. Yeah. So what does it mean? Break it down. What actually came in today?
Well, they it wasn't a clear. They didn't take every checkbox and mark yes or no for Apple. Obviously, they checked a lot of yes boxes, but they went through and on the software patents, they pretty much gave them a straightforward win. We're talking about bounce back, tap to zoom patents of Apple's, and then on the design patents, it was kind of a mixed bag, but it was obviously 90% Apple. But there were a few cases where they actually did their job and looked at the phones and said this doesn't copy the design patents, or I think also on the trade dress side for certain models, which I think probably should never have been included under some of the S2 models don't really match up very nicely.
Right. And
with the design patents.
So what were the places where Apple actually didn't get what it wanted? I mean, can you be more specific about those spots?
Yeah, there's quite a few of them. They're kind of broken up. And for instance, on the software patents, on a 381 bounce back patent, they had every device infringed.
Right.
Now, again, these are the devices that came out before they did their design around for the bounce back. On the tap to zoom, I believe it was the Ace, Intercept, and Replenish were the only ones that were found not to infringe.
Does that seem odd to you? Those devices were singled out amongst the others?
I wasn't aware that there was really any difference when it came to the software. I could see this happening on the design side because there were some changes in the design. I was a little, perhaps, I don't know. I mean, I don't know why, if you're talking about the same.
It's the same
TouchWiz
OS, right? I mean,
it's the same TouchWiz.
This is odd to me. I mean, does this make you feel like this jury didn't fully understand some of what they were looking at? Because to me, it's if you're looking at the software and you see the bounce back infringement happening on the Galaxy S2, and it's running the same software as. And by the way, I don't know for certain that this is the case, but my impression was is this a particular version of TouchWiz that they are saying is on all of these devices? I don't know the actual version that was running on each of the devices they'd seen. But if it didn't have the fix, basically, the workaround, wouldn't they have had to find that for all of those devices? Doesn't that seem? I mean, the software is the same, right?
Yeah, and this is the part during the trial that was pretty wonky, is that they really didn't have enough time to go through all these particular devices. So a lot of this analysis the jurors did in the deliberation room. And I'm not sure why the ACE and Interceptor replenished wouldn't have the same exact software features as the rest of the devices. I mean, I can tell you on the design side why there were some no votes on infringement.
Feel free, please do.
Yeah. So if you go through those, you can see that they. I'm pulling it up because it was hard to track during the actual reading of the verdict.
Well, I'll tell you what. Why don't you take a look? I know there's a bunch of stuff that you're just getting up to speed on because this just came through. We'll get back to this. I want to read the statement that Samsung issued over this. If I can just find it in my notes here, they issued this statement. This is from Samsung. Today's verdict should not be viewed as a win for Apple, but as a loss for the American consumer. It will lead to fewer choices, less innovation, and potentially higher prices. It is unfortunate that patent law can be manipulated to give one company a monopoly over rectangles with rounded corners or technology that is being improved every day by Samsung and other companies. Consumers have the right to choices, and they know what they are buying when they purchase Samsung products. This is not the final word in this case or in battles being waged in courts and tribunals around the world, some of which have already rejected many of Apple's claims. Samsung will continue to innovate and offer choices for the consumer. So let me get the opinion of everybody here. David and Ross, feel free to chime in. Is Apple appealing this? Are they? And Matt, obviously, your opinion is very valuable here. Does Apple come back? Sorry, not Apple. Is Samsung appealing this? Are they going to come back and say, we're sticking around, we're not budging?
Well, I mean, my question to you is, why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't they not appeal this? I mean, it's clearly a loss in almost every sense for them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they could say, hey, you know what? We got beat. We're going to keep doing what we're doing. We've already worked around most of this stuff. We don't need to keep, stay in litigation. That costs money, and it takes time.
Actually, that's a question I want to ask Matt. Not to derail too much, Matt. In your sense, do any of Samsung's newer products fall at risk now? Is the S3 at risk from any of these decisions today?
Well, the S3 is in a different case, so it's actually different patents asserted. But just taking it, kind of looking at what they got infringement on. Samsung's statement's a little crazy because for the most part, we're talking about damages here for past wrongs. You're not talking about injunctions for a lot of these features because their designs are different. So you don't really have a product that's going to be a problem for the design patents. And for the software patents, at least the bounce back, we know they have a design around. And I'm sure it's not even an issue anymore with regard to infringement of that software patent. So tap to zoom is still alive, and tap to zoom, as far as I know, is still fully functional inside of TouchWiz and Android in general.
And they found for Apple in the tap to zoom piece, correct?
Yeah, that was the 915 patent. So yeah,
right. So does that set a precedent now? I mean, does that mean that anywhere tap to zoom exists, Apple can safely go after it and win? I mean, is if the precedent is set with this, does that mean that all they need to do is say to a jury, look, the courts have already found for us? I mean, can they go to HTC? Can they go to any other manufacturer and just roll out the same argument?
Well, not really. I mean, it's obvious. It's great leverage for Apple going into a courtroom, but they still have to align this new claim against a new device, whether it's HTC or LG or anybody or Motorola.
So sorry, not to interrupt. There's a statement from Apple here that apparently they gave to, I don't know if they've given to a number of. This is in the Times. The amount of evidence presented during the trial showed that Samsung's copying went far deeper than even we knew, said Apple spokeswoman Katie Cotton. We make these products to delight our customers, not for our competitors to flagrantly copy. We are grateful to the jury for their service and for investing the time to listen to our story, and we were thrilled to be able to finally tell it. The mountain of evidence... sorry, that's the first part of it. Then the mountain of evidence. The lawsuits between Apple and Samsung were much more about patents than money. They were about values. At Apple, we value originality and innovation and pour our lives into making the best products on earth. We make these products to delight our customers, not for our competitors to flagrantly copy. We applaud the court for finding Samsung's behavior willful and for sending a loud and clear message that stealing isn't right. So that's Apple. Not surprising that they are pleased with the verdict, and they see this as a kind of a, this kind of proves their theory that they've been ripped off. And I will say the trade dress claims, and we talked about this on the Vergecast, I think this weekend, the week before, and Matt, I'm sure you guys have discussed this at length. I think the trade dress claims were clear, particularly in the case of the phone OS. I mean, there was some really flagrant stuff there. And it did seem like Samsung went into it saying, Apple's doing X, Y, and Z. How do we copy that for our product?
Well, and the evidence to that effect was brutal. There was so much of slides of the iPhone side by side with the Samsung phone.
Yeah, the document,
here's what they did right and here's what they did.
Where they have a
wrong.
141-page document that was kind of like, hey, they just did this page after page trying to figure out how to copy.
Feature by feature.
The patent stuff seems, I don't know, I guess the patent stuff seems more surprising to me, and it seems especially surprising given the fact that it was left out of certain products that would have, presumably had the same feature. I mean, I guess I'm not concerned with the idea that Apple, that they found in favor of Apple. What I'm concerned with is that this jury didn't know exactly what they were looking at. Does that seem?
Well, that's where the 21 hours of deliberation thing becomes something I'm worried about. Like, Matt, do you think it's feasible to say that in 21 hours and 37 minutes or whatever it was, they actually did their true due diligence on every single device to find every single thing? Because it's like you said, Josh, these phones presumably have the same OS with the same TouchWiz, and yet they're finding, the bounce back scrolling on one and not the other.
Right.
That seems really off to me.
Yeah, I don't understand it.
So I think here's what I think. I think they did about half their job. I think they went into it, and I think they took their time initially probably and got through a lot of those charts. And I think there might be something we're missing with regard to whether or not the bounce back is exactly the same in all the devices. I don't know.
But how can they bring a? I know they're going against the specific devices, but how can they bring a case about this patent if the versions of software are different across devices? I mean, I understand that there's a certain implementation of that. Can they just say, well, it's a broad sweep of 4 different versions of your software do it? Is that what this was, or was it more about a specific version? I mean, obviously these might have different versions of the software loaded up. I have to assume that they do. So
they're cutting it off. I mean, they're not including ICS in the claims. I mean, and I don't think that, and I can't remember what the number was, but they might have capped it at like 2.2, or I don't know if you guys know when some of these design rounds came about, but it's only been.
But the design round didn't come. But the bounce effect, was it even in Android originally? I don't recall. I mean, maybe they took it out. Sure. Maybe they took it out of 2. I think 2.3 was where they introduced the little bright pop at the end of the list. So 2.3, if it was in stock Android, then I don't really recall at this point. But if they're only looking at devices that are within up to 2.2, then I can understand if those devices were on 2.3. And I think we need to find that out. And I'll have Michael do a little research on that. You want to do a little research and find out if the devices they didn't find for the bounce back patent, if those were gingerbread, if they were 2.3 or not? Okay. So we'll look into that. But it's interesting. I mean,
they took their time. I mean, these on the first part. Now, I think it's pretty clear now we're starting to see some mistakes that they made towards the end of the verdict form. I guess there's a couple more that just came up since we went on, dealing with patent exhaustion and whether or not they should have ruled the way they did there based on a previous answer.
What is that? So what does that mean? Can you explain that a little bit?
Patent exhaustion is when Apple's argument was that Samsung sold these broadband chips and licensed them to Intel, who then sold them to Apple. So therefore, Apple gets a license indirectly through Intel. Therefore, you can't come after Apple for infringement. So it's just, you can't double dip if you're Samsung. You already got your money, your license fees out of those patents by licensing and selling a product or allowing Intel to create a product that Apple then used in its devices. And apparently there's some inconsistency now that the jury's going to have to go look at in there.
So they didn't.
All this is at the end.
Is it that they didn't understand the difference? I mean,
I think they got through. I mean, it's pretty clear that there was no intention going into this to really reward Samsung in any way.
Right. Well, no, I mean, Samsung it's $0 rewarded to them, right?
Yeah, they got. I think there's probably arguments that they didn't even find them to infringe the Fran patents.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
I think that's
crazy.
correct.
I mean, it's a 3G standards. I mean, it's a little weird that they would infringe a patent that they, in theory, have to implement in order to.
So to me, this kind of reinforces my feeling that, like, I think it's, and Nilay said this a bunch, and we talked about this, but it seems a little crazy to put 9 regular people in a room and say, decide something, and it's not just like somebody broke into my house and stole something, and I want to get my money for the thing they stole, or I want to get that thing back. This is like, a couple of these questions are, you're going to set a precedent for what this means. Like, can you, like, when a future trial happens, right, they're going to look at that, the Fran stuff, and someone's going to say, well, look, there's a precedent for this. These, in this trial, they didn't find for the Fran, for Samsung and the Fran stuff. And so the question is, like, well, I mean, the debate, I think, is like, is this the best way to decide? Extremely complex, extremely technical. I mean, I don't think a team of Verge editors could have done a much better job with this. And this is something that we do for a living. I mean, this is really highly technical stuff. And you've got to have a real understanding of what this means, both from a legal standpoint, what it means legally, and what it means technically. And so I worry that, like, this is not who I want deciding what will dictate, some points of innovation in this industry. I do think that Samsung had something coming to them in terms of this verdict. I do think that there was clear infringement. I just worry that putting 9 random folks in a room and saying, decide if this patent is valid or if they've infringed on very technical aspects of a product is quite difficult for them. Do we have Nilay? What is is he ready to go? Yeah, he's ready. Okay, Nilay is here. Just get ready. Things are about to get crazy. Nilay Patel is presumably on the air with us now.
I believe Nilay's already written something like 10 million words on this trial.
Has
Ross
an
approximate number?
Minutes, yeah.
Has Ross dropped? Do we lose Ross? Okay, it's Nilay now. So we've got Nilay and Matt, who along with Brian Bishop, who was in the courtroom tonight and has been there throughout this trial. And we'll continue to report on it from the scene. Am
I here? Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Can Nilay not hear us?
No, I can hear you.
Okay,
I didn't know if you could see me.
We can see you. You look like you just witnessed the verdict.
I look like hell, dude.
You look like you just witnessed the verdict being turned in for this trial. So, dude, go ahead. What do you make of it?
So here's what I think. Just having listened to it. And as it was coming out, the jury basically, I think what they did was they decided that Samsung had copied Apple. They decided that Apple was right. And then they went through and said, this is a patent on bounce back scrolling. Let's look at all the Samsung devices in the box and see which ones have it. Okay, most of them do. So those all infringe. This is a patent on tap to zoom. Which ones have it? And they did all that hard work of saying, everything here is valid. Let's see which Samsung devices actually infringe, but Apple's mostly right. And then they went and said the only thing that Apple lost, the only kind of major piece here that Apple lost was on the iPad design stuff, right? The jury said the Samsung tablets, the Tab 10.1, the older one that looked pretty much exactly like the iPad, they said this one doesn't infringe the iPad, right? People aren't confused about it in the marketplace. It doesn't violate Apple's patents. That's the only place where Apple really lost, is protecting the look of the iPad.
And that's crazy. Which is the only one where they had an injunction going into it.
Which is odd, though. This is the thing that strikes me as so bizarre, is that the one place where you could have really, I think, given a good argument, like you said, there was an injunction. There was a pretty good argument, like, they did kind of rip this off, and they didn't find there, which is like, where was the
I don't know. So I don't understand. So, like, here's what I'm saying. Like, I think the jury decided that Apple was right. I think Apple won. Like, ultimately, Apple's case was, we spent all this time and money creating these revolutionary products, and Samsung didn't spend the time and money. They didn't take any risk, and they just make products like ours. And we've been saying all along, it's a good story. And I think the jury bought it, and they did a little bit of the work. to figure out exactly what devices. So, they didn't say the Droid Charge looked like the iPhone design patents. They understood that level of complexity.
They definitely got that. Yeah.
But then they got to Samsung's case, and it was clear at that point, I think, they ruled against every single element of Samsung's case, like down the line. They said none of Samsung's patents are infringed, even the patents that are part of the 3G standard, which is like, dude, like the phones connect to the network. The patents are part like there's probably infringement.
Let me be clear.
You don't have to be technical about it. It's like an A to B relation.
I want to be clear. You would say, in your estimation, and Matt, I'd like to hear from you. They got that wrong. Like they did. Like Samsung was infringed upon for those patents. Is that what you're saying?
I mean, I'm saying unless you're an electrical engineer or like a cellular data engineer, there's no way for you to know. I don't know, but I do know that Samsung says that the patents are part of the standard. The devices clearly make use of the standard.
Right.
Intel, which puts the chips in the devices, has a license to the patents. Like
I think this is really like there's a lot of emotion. I think there's a lot of emotion here. I mean, I think they were like this. You're right about the story, and I think they said, "Look, Samsung's the bad guy here. They screwed up. We're not going to give them something." Like I think they kind of threw them a bone almost with the Galaxy Tab infringement, right? Or with the Galaxy Tab stuff, saying like, "Yeah, it doesn't really look that," or the Charge. But those are easy. I think those are just like okay, Samsung's not going to get hit with every single thing, but it did seem like with those with the standard stuff. They were just saying, you know what?
Samsung didn't win any. And they didn't do the hard work. Like Samsung did win one where they said the patents it doesn't infringe the standards patents, and so Samsung doesn't violate Section 2 of the Sherman Antitrust Act. And you can that's the sort of question where they're like, look, we already decided most of the case. We decided Apple won. We gave them $1 billion. No, who cares? Like, no, they didn't violate it. Who cares? Like, I don't even know what that means. No. And you get that feeling towards the end of Samsung's case where it's very technical, very dry, did they use the doctrine of patent exhaustion? They're like, no, screw it. And Samsung's lawyers are in court now saying, well, they can't say Apple has a valid defense of patent exhaustion because they said they didn't infringe the patents. So there's this wonky stuff that the jury just didn't do correctly because I think they already decided that Apple won.
Right.
And I don't think there's any way to interpret this. I've been saying, and there's a lot of shades of gray between Apple winning and Apple losing.
Like 50,
and I think
at least.
At least 50.
Easily.
There's a lot of sexy shades of gray in this case. This one is very much closer to Apple. I mean, I think it's a definitive victory for Apple. They didn't win everything. I think Samsung's story, you can't patent a rectangle. I think that came through with the iPad. I think they said, look, the Galaxy Tab doesn't look like the iPad.
Unless it's a rectangular icon.
Yeah, well, they upheld.
But I mean,
they upheld the grid of patent.
That is patented, right? Okay.
Yeah, they upheld it. They said that a lot of the devices infringe. To me, I think the jury made a decision that Apple won, and then they went through exactly what winning meant. And then they decided that Samsung lost, and it was easy for them to go through what losing meant because they just had to hit no a bunch of times.
All right, so here's a question. This is for everyone. David, Matt, Neil.
I'd actually Matt, do you agree? I mean, Matt and I have been talking about this. I'm curious if he agrees with my take on this.
Yeah, I do. I think when I was looking at it and I saw these periodic no's and non-infringements and when they did throw them the bone, I feel like it was like when you're taking you cheat on an exam and I got to miss a couple. I got to throw a couple in there so it's not obvious. That's what it felt like to me. I really felt like they were going into it knowing exactly where they wanted to come out.
You saying they gave it a little realism by saying that the tab
can't be 100% for Apple. Then they just look like schmucks.
Right. So obviously Apple's pleased. This is a huge win for them. What I want to know is I have two big questions, and I think this is the question that tomorrow and Monday and for the rest of our lives until the Earth is destroyed in December of 2012. I think everybody's going to be asking, there's two things. One, what does this mean now? What happens now, in terms of what Apple does next? What is the next, in this war between Android and iOS, which is really what it is? What's the next immediate move for Apple or for Samsung or for anybody who's making an Android device? You know, like what are the repercussions of this? And then the next question is, and we'll take that one, and then we'll go to the next one. The next one I want to know is, what does this mean for? How will this affect? How will these? How will this case affect the way people come at designing and innovating in technology, and particularly in the mobile space? I'm just wondering if you have a sense of that. But like, I'd like to talk about the first one. Like, what does this mean now? Does Apple just go? Is this license to go completely crazy? Were they already going? I mean, crazy in the sense that like they can just sue anybody they want and win.
Well, who's left to sue? I mean, they have lawsuits.
But but they could. Well, I don't know. You tell me. Who's left to sue?
No one.
Verge.com. They're coming after us. Do we have any rounded rectangles on the site? We need to do something about those immediately.
Even if they're already suing everybody, doesn't this make their case against everybody else really easy?
No, that's what I'm saying.
It's like really obvious. So
what are the next steps? Like, are there more people to sue, and how does this affect the cases that they have? And are there more cases to come with companies that they already? I know they've already got some in the works, but.
So here, I always believed that this case would settle. I always thought that the jury would take forever.
You believe wrong, basically.
I was wrong. The reason I thought it would settle, and I think one of the most underreported parts of this case has been the lengthy settlement negotiations that have occurred between Apple and Samsung, and the slides we have from Apple that are like, we would prefer Samsung to take a license. Here are some license rates that you can pay to make your devices that use all of our patents because you're a partner and our friend. And Samsung said no, right? So now Apple can say to Samsung, look, we can do this again. We can do this in a few months with the Galaxy Nexus. We can do it again with the new Galaxy Tab. Or you can finally come to the table. We won't make you pay the $1 billion, but we'll make you pay a bunch of.
Is the suggestion that Samsung didn't come to the table?
They didn't reach a settlement agreement, and I think part of that was because they both wanted this additional leverage. Right. And now Apple has a lot of leverage, right? They won.
But if Samsung didn't
run around in circles,
if Samsung didn't come to the table or didn't go for whatever their terms were, is it possible that whatever they were proposing was far more damaging than what the outcome of this case was?
Yeah,
I think
it was a huge number. I mean, Apple wanted $30 an iPhone or $30 a Samsung phone.
I mean, to me, this is like if Samsung has to eat the $1 billion, which, by the way, they can eat. I mean, it's not nice. Nobody wants to like lose $1 billion, but Samsung's a very large company.
Yeah, that's not a crippling amount.
Somebody just sent me a tweet that said this case is actually good value for Samsung. They've paid $1 billion to become the world's #1 phone manufacturer from basically nowhere. Which is, they were basically, Nokia was much bigger than that.
It is a good point. I mean, I'm not saying that they're the winner here, but I will say that, if Apple wanted $30 a phone or whatever, and what they ultimately have to pay is $1 billion, and they get a, hey, don't steal our stuff anymore.
Yeah,
kind of made out okay.
So they've got to pay the $1 billion. The $1 billion is, to be very clear, the $1 billion isn't the end. Right. The $1 billion that's what the jury decided that Samsung would have paid to Apple if it had properly licensed everything. Plus whatever's Apple's lost sales would have been, plus a punishment because Samsung did it on purpose. Right.
Yeah.
Now that's done. So that's everything in the past. You've been punished. And now in the future, Samsung has to pay another royalty rate. And like Matt is saying, Apple wants absurd royalty rates, right? They want $30.
Can they now dictate those royalty rates? I mean, because this has been found
I think they have much more. I think they have much more leverage in negotiations. I think, like any negotiation, you come out with.
I'm sorry, royalty rates on what devices?
Yeah,
they want to retroactively find.
Yeah, so
they want to retroactively find $30 a device for each.
No, not like that. And Matt, correct me if I'm wrong here, but the way this would work is Samsung and Apple pay to settle the outstanding litigation, right? And then they say in the future, just like Apple's agreement with Microsoft, we're going to sign a cross-licensing agreement where Samsung pays Apple some amount of money in the future per device. And then we'll put in it an anti-cloning agreement where you can't make any devices that look just like our devices. And that's the agreement Apple has with Microsoft. It clearly works well. They're not suing each other. They're very friendly.
Yeah, it's working great. It's working great for Microsoft right now. I mean,
they
don't have
Microsoft
to worry about
has to make good products.
But let's be clear. Even with that in place, I think if Microsoft achieved enough success in this space, they could find something. I think they could find something to have a problem with. I don't believe that like Microsoft is just being left alone because they've got these agreements in place. I think they're being left alone because they're not a threat. They're not in any way a realistic threat at this point.
Sure,
they're years away from being a threat.
Let's just keep in mind that the history of the mobile industry has not been one of lawsuits. It's been of Apple coming out with the iPhone, everybody else making products that look like the iPhone, and Apple saying, hold on a minute, you've got to pay us, or hold on a minute, you can't do that. And that's what happens after every sort of disruptive innovation. But usually the industry is really good at cross-licensing. So, for example, Nokia still makes a lot of phones. They're competitive with Apple. They sued Apple for violating its patents, and they settled. And Apple paid Nokia a bunch of money and gave it some of its patents.
How much of this is actually driven by this? I mean, what I assume, like based on Walter Isaacson's biography of Steve Jobs, there's clearly, somebody, I think Matt Panzarino from the Next Web tweeted the quote right after this verdict came down, which was, I'm going to go thermonuclear. I'm going to destroy Android because it's a stolen product.
Which is ridiculous.
But I mean, well, it is.
Yeah, I mean,
we know intellectually it's ridiculous, but how much of this is driven by, what was presumably a mandate when Jobs, before his death at Apple, that we got to go after Android. I mean, like,
well,
Matt,
it's true, but Jobs got it wrong for one big reason: is that this case doesn't implicate every Android phone coming out. I mean, this case in particular deals with 90% of phones that don't exist anymore.
Yeah, but
you're talking about a lot of things that won't even affect the market. You're not talking about injunctions that will matter, and you're not talking about Android going away.
But if they go after HTC, and if they go after Samsung, and they go after every little bit that they think infringes, it's like a war of attrition, isn't it? I mean, it's a death by 1,000 cuts eventually. I mean,
but HTC doesn't infringe most of these patents.
No, but they've got other claims. No.
Well, and this is also where my big question is about trade dress, and I think this is where this comes in a lot. Is that like you can design around some of the the bounce back scrolling and stuff, but a lot of what seems to have been set here is that Apple's devices look the way they do, and that's significant, and that's they own the way that device looks.
But you wouldn't confuse a Galaxy Nexus with an iPhone.
No,
and they didn't.
But I wouldn't confuse a Galaxy Ace with an iPhone either. But
I mean, there is.
Are you sure, David? Because they look very similar.
No. I think there is a series of Samsung devices that they specifically and unabashedly, I would say, designed to look like an iPhone.
Okay,
I mean,
the Galaxy Ace is a bad example.
The Galaxy is the Galaxy. What's the one that was on T-Mobile? The original Galaxy S on T-Mobile. Was it the Vibrant?
Yeah.
Was just brazenly ripping off the 3GS design. It had the silver band. The shape was the same. I mean, you put them next to each other with the screen off. I mean, it really looks like. I think there was a period where Samsung was doing that. I think that. I feel like there was a brief period where that happened, and then everybody was like, we got to make something that looks unique. And I think most of the phones that are on the market now, I mean, there's no question, Apple definitely revolutionized the market when it said, we're going to do this touchscreen phone. But, there has to be a point where you get beyond, like, it's a touchscreen. I mean, if they found for the charge, I think that's a kind of a good sign that even this jury was willing to say, all right, look, there's some obvious points here where there's not infringement on the design. But so what I'm saying is, I guess getting back to this point, they're going after HTC for some other stuff. They've got some other Samsung stuff lined up. I mean, who else is there really? Who else? Oh, Motorola. Right? Yeah. So
but keep in mind, I mean, to David's point, the other cases against Samsung don't have any of this trade dress stuff in it, don't really have any of this design patent stuff in it. The case against HTC, none of the design stuff, no trade dress stuff. Motorola is the same case.
But they're going after the things they can go after. So what I'm saying is, if Apple's found for in this case, and HTC has to worry and Motorola has to worry. I mean, everybody, and by the way, everybody online right now is saying like, boy, Microsoft really made out nice in this one because everybody's looking at Microsoft going, we've got all this protection. Microsoft has all this protection and all these agreements in place with Apple, as we just discussed. This would be a nice safe haven if I want to make a unique phone and sell it in Verizon store. I don't have to worry about Apple coming after me for infringing on something because I've got the protection of Microsoft. So everybody's saying like, boy, Microsoft made out like a bandit. I mean, isn't the goal here to obliterate Android? Isn't it truly a war of attrition where if you make it hard enough for these manufacturers, and by the way, it's a business strategy. I'm not arguing against it. I'm just saying that it does seem like they could make it hard enough and worrisome enough that they drive these guys to somebody like Microsoft, who in this case, by the way, is like, how great is it if you break up what Google is doing in the market and then drive people to your fourth place competitor
but Apple
doesn't
doesn't
have
have
a
be in a
viable
position
who
they're
doesn't-
in right now with
What-
this
Well,
case.
hold on for 1 second. I mean, one of Steve Jobs' earlier quotes that is, I think, probably more important than we're going to go thermonuclear war on Android is when he said, for Apple to win, Microsoft doesn't have to lose. And these two companies, they work more closely together than I think we ever give them credit
He didn't
for.
say that about Google, though, did he?
He hasn't said that about, well,
He never said that about Google, is my point.
but but Apple's not run by the ghost of Steve Jobs or some misplaced
No, I'm not suggesting
loyalty
that.
to his anger.
No, but there are obvious business concerns here. But what I'm saying is simply that as a business strategy, it would make sense to chip away at your biggest competitor.
Yeah,
which would drive.
Well, I've heard for a long time that Apple and Google talk about blanket licenses for Android, about settling all this stuff, about getting back to business, and they're big companies. They're both in the Valley. I think they talk a lot. And I just wrote this "What does it mean?" post, and the last line is, "Well, if this is the chip that Apple needed, it's up.
Yeah.
If this is the chip that Apple needed to get Google to sit down and pay the money, then maybe it's time. Maybe it's time for Google to just suck it up and say, look, we built this thing. We built Android. We built it really fast. We didn't, we basically created it out of nothing. Obviously, it has a lot of patent issues because it's built on Linux, and Microsoft has always said Linux has patent issues. All of our OEMs are paying Microsoft. Maybe it's time that we have them pay Apple, or maybe we pay Apple, and we can all go back to building shit. If that's the outcome, that would be a great outcome. That would have made all of this worth it. If the outcome is Apple's on the warpath and they're suing everybody, and Google keeps insisting that Android is safe, and then the OEMs keep insisting they didn't copy anything, I don't think that accomplishes anything. And I think the other important thing to keep in mind is that, for every lawsuit Apple has open, they've got to pay for it as well. And,
Right.
they have billions in the bank.
I don't think they're worried about that.
Look, they spent hundreds of millions of dollars on this case. They're spending hundreds of millions of dollars on cases around the world for other things. And, they might have billions in the bank and they might make billions every quarter, but that's still money that they could spend in other places. I don't think anybody likes paying the lawyer.
I will say something about this.
That's why I work for you now. Because nobody likes paying.
Love paying.
Yes, that's true. As a man who's paid lawyers, I can tell you it is highly unenjoyable.
Can I just interject with one quick
Yeah, you
procedural
absolutely-
note?
yes.
So we're done. It's over. The jury has been dismissed.
It's finished. And
They came back.
what did they change?
They came back.
They
There were the
reduced
two
it.
issues were there were two patent issues that they charged damages for but found no infringement for, and they've dropped the total number of damages down to $1.049 billion.
Oh, they chopped off a little
They
cash.
did.
Wow.
About,
$2.5
about $2 million. Yeah, $2.5
I think
million.
that's a victory for Samsung.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
And they also changed from yes to no on both devices, saying that they didn't infringe.
Right. So that's the jury being lazy again, right? They're like, well, we don't want to figure it out. Doesn't infringe. We'll rearrange the money and we'll lower it. I mean, that's not a, you can say maybe the Mesmerize did infringe or whatever the other device was.
The Intercept.
The
Best
Samsung,
phone names ever. That was the best thing about this case was the phone names.
It's a huge list of
Yeah.
Never
shame
heard of.
for Samsung. Yeah. I just don't think like that. Matt and I have been saying for a long time that the huge complexity of Apple's case made this a logistical nightmare for them to convince the jury. And I think that was borne out. And I think it was borne out in both, as an advantage and as a huge disadvantage. And I think the advantage was they made it so complicated for the jury to say Apple won that they just said that they won, right? They're like, screw it, we're not figuring this out. Apple won, check a bunch of boxes and we'll go. And as we're seeing, they made some mistakes.
Right.
The disadvantage is now they've provided Samsung a lot of opportunities to challenge what the jury actually said. Matt, can you take us through kind of the appeals process here? I know you probably had a better handle on it than I do.
Well, the biggest thing coming up right now is everybody's going to file motions. Even Apple's going to file motions to challenge certain parts of the jury verdict. Because, if you don't get everything, you still try to get everything after the case. But what happens now is they file post-trial briefs, and Apple's basically, Apple and Samsung, but mostly Samsung, setting up their case for appeal. They have to raise all these issues and challenge the verdict so that they can appeal it to the federal circuit. But one of the big things that's coming up is Apple's affirmative brief. They're going to file a motion because the jury found willfulness, that they're going to file for a motion to triple the damages. So the statutory provision allows for, if a jury finds willful, which, by the way, they often do, if they find infringement, they often find willful. because they don't know the difference. It's really nuanced.
Right.
So they find willful, and the judge can make a determination to triple those damages up to 3 times what they are right now, which, $3 billion is a lot of money. I don't see it happening. It's a rare event for the judge to take it and triple it, but they might adjust it.
That would be in the neighborhood of what Apple originally asked for.
That would be really close to what they originally asked for.
It was just shy of $3 billion.
Yeah, I mean, it would be more, but it would be in the neighborhood. I have trouble.
By the way, can I just point out that we're now at the point where we're saying $500 million is in the neighborhood of something?
Well, isn't it actually more like 750? I thought it was 2.25. Is it
2.525?
Oh, 2.525. Okay, boy, I've been messing up numbers.
That's totally in the neighborhood of
I've been messing up numbers left, right, center. As soon as they announced the dollar amount, I typoed. I did 1.5 instead of 1.05, which then apparently a bunch of people retweeted, including like Associated Press and some other. And so, congrats to me for ruining news
propagating
forever.
wrong
You know what?
information.
Just when you're excited and hurriedly typing, just when it's a number and it's billions, make sure you get it right. No, but one thing I'll say about this, and by the way, like if they do come back and get triple damages, I feel like that's a kind of a nasty move. But I also feel like that's going to be difficult to do, considering the fact that this jury wasn't exactly. I mean, yes, there is a lot of affirmative for Apple, but I think it feels like it's not like just they went down the line and said Samsung. I mean, I know it does seem that way, but like I think that a judge would be able to look at this and go, well, the jury wasn't, so resolute on every piece of this that like Samsung just got to get hit with had the book thrown at them.
Right.
Well, can I tell you one thing about willful damages? The judge has a bunch of factors to look at, and 2 of the key factors are, one, whether you can show evidence of intent to copy, which we've seen a lot of that with Samsung. And the second one is totally outside of infringement. It has to do with litigation tactics. So if the court feels that Samsung has acted inappropriately during the litigation, she can take that into account and whether or not the triple damages or somehow multiply damages above what they are.
Oh God,
that's rough for Samsung
does Samsung endanger themselves by going back if they appeal? I mean, there aren't worse repercussions if they appeal, right? Or do they have to go? I mean, what?
Well, not really. Well, I mean, the appellate court could say, well, the jury was wrong in some respects, and it's even worse for Samsung than we thought. But mostly, it's either going to, kind of affirm everything or chop it down.
And appeals courts don't run around overturning juries for picks.
No, right. And when
Samsung has a big mountain to climb there,
right? So,
and the appeals court can also say no. I mean, that's like. Samsung can say, we appeal the entire case. And the appeals court can say, well, there's only one issue here that's worth appealing. Or there's only
summarily dismiss the entire thing and say, no, we don't want to hear it.
And so what is the danger at this point for Samsung if they don't appeal and they just, I mean, they have to go, do they have to go into talks with Apple about how much they will award them per device, or can they skirt that? Can they get out of it? Can they avoid it in some way?
It would be hugely irresponsible for either Apple or Samsung to not immediately start holding additional meetings about further licenses and settlements. I mean, they've got other outstanding cases out there. The Galaxy Nexus case is out there. They have to do it. This isn't it's not like sports. It's funny. The other side of our company is a sports company, and they have wins and losses, and at the end of the year, somebody wins a Super Bowl, and then we all start over again next year. This isn't like that. This is business, and it'll keep going tomorrow. So Samsung, so Apple won a huge decisive victory, right? You stole our stuff. Now they've got to go back and say, well, what are we going to do about all this other outstanding conflict we have? We have to resolve it so our companies can move forward. So I'm sure they're going to talk immediately. Maybe they'll probably take the weekend so Apple's lawyers can get drunk and Samsung's lawyers can stare at the
well. I think they're both getting drunk for very different reasons this weekend.
It's actually really interesting that Samsung's lawyers represent everybody else. And there's a lot of talk that Google pays Samsung's firm, Quinn Emanuel, to represent Samsung, HTC, Motorola. So they've got a lot, Google has a lot riding on this. Samsung has a lot riding on this. But that law firm has an enormous amount riding on it because they're representing all these companies against Apple and all these other cases.
So here, I got a couple of questions Do you want to say something?
I'm going to veer into a totally different direction. So ask your
Okay, let me
questions.
ask a couple questions and then make a statement, and then we'll veer wherever you're veering.
I like veering. I'm good.
So my first question is, and these two are kind of tied together. So the latest version of Android has things that two things are happening. The latest version of iOS has stuff that's definitely you could look at it and say that's from Android, like the notifications, for instance. Now, I don't know if Google has patents on that or not, or any of these other companies hold patents. Maybe Motorola holds a patent on that. I have no idea, which is now owned by Google, Mobility at least. And then there's new things that were introduced in Ice Cream Sandwich that are definitely like iOS, like the way the icons will auto-rearrange on the screen, for instance.
Yeah. You mean Jelly Bean, not ICS.
No,
right?
in ICS they were introduced that the icons would rearrange on the screen.
I thought that was Jelly. It doesn't matter.
No, it's
or even like folders.
So it's in folders. It was in folders. It was in folders in ICS, and now it's
everywhere.
It's system wide
Yeah.
on the home screens.
Sure.
These seem
This
like
is way in the woods.
What's that?
It doesn't matter. Yeah, continue. I take your point.
But these seem like places where Google almost went out of their way to do it. Like nobody had asked for it. There were other ways you could have dealt with it, or you could have just left it as it was, which is that it didn't do it at all. Do we feel like, I'm just curious to know, are there protections at this point? Like, is Google not going to go after Apple for this notifications thing? And is Apple not going to go after Google for stuff like that for some other reason? Or is it possible that they actually do go back for things like that? I'm just curious. Like, those two in particular stand out to me as notable as a bounce back. So I'm wondering if there are further cases to be had in that situation, or if Apple doesn't want to go to straight to Google, and it's harder to pin some of that stuff on. I mean, who makes an ICS phone right now? Samsung.
Well,
Right.
Well, I mean, Matt, you want to go after this one?
Yeah. So two things. First, I haven't seen any evidence that Google has a patent on notifications or anything really. They have
an application on the notifications.
Yes, it's pending. And I guarantee you at this point, Google has a pretty good grasp on Apple's portfolio and knows what they need to do in certain respects to avoid it. There's no way they're designing Jelly Bean, or even before that with ICS, without not just the patents that Apple's asserted, but the patents that they actually have in the pipeline.
So you think the icon rearrangement is not something that Apple can move on?
I doubt it.
Okay.
I haven't seen a patent for that, and I'm pretty sure if they had one, Google would have known about it. I'm pretty sure they're smarter about it now.
So and this actually brings me to my next statement, which is I think that if you look at what Samsung did in terms of design, both hardware design, in terms of what Android was doing with infringing on this bounce back patent, which at the time there was a point where we were all like, well, what's the big deal? It's a bounce back patent. But now you see when you start to get into when you see a trial like this unfold, and when you've talked about it enough, and when you see the different ways you could do it, you start to go, okay, I get it. I mean, I don't think that patent is really that important, and I don't think people see the bounce. I don't think people see the bounce back and identify that as being an iPhone behavior. I think that things like bounce back and slide to unlock exist in reality, and that's why they made sense.
Yeah, what the
iPhone.
experts say was like $50 value. Something like that.
Yeah,
I mean,
some ridiculous stuff.
I think that's outrageous. But what I will say is, I look at the Galaxy Nexus as a product of avoiding copying, and there's a bunch of really good stuff in there, like a bunch of good ideas, new ideas, stuff that we didn't see in other phones, or variations that are like, well, it's kind of like that, but they tweaked it and they moved it, and it's actually better for the end user. And so I feel like, is Apple kind of getting what it wants here in the sense that it doesn't want people copying? And is that, I know we talk about how bad this could be, with the precedent that it sets, but isn't it in some way, if they can't go after them, for, hey, you put like a color burst at the bottom of your list, doesn't it actually improve? I mean, doesn't it actually mean that people have to innovate more? And
well, I don't know where this tweet was, but somebody who was obviously a fan of Samsung tweeted at me, good job, Apple. You forced Samsung to innovate faster and outpace the iPhone more, which is true. I mean, you can argue, you can say that the patent system sucks, so you should have intellectual property. But if you're not allowed to do one thing, that means you have to do another thing. Yeah. And a lot of times, seeing what's been done and thinking I have to come up with a new idea forces you to come up with a better idea. And I think there's a lot of that in Google's current phones. I think particularly Jelly Bean has a lot of very different ideas about how an operating system should work, and I think that's great. I think it's for the best for Samsung to stop copying other devices.
Yes.
And I've forever said, Samsung is really great at making cheap copies of other devices, of other things. And I think it's, Samsung's a huge company with a lot of money, a lot of clout, a lot of power, a lot of influence, and it's for everyone's benefit if they say we have to start really competing with Apple. We have to make devices that are way better than Apple's devices and not just take their ideas and improve on them and iterate on them. And that's cool.
Yeah. Apple will never be in this good a position again. I mean, what they had with Samsung with their early S1 and S2, even some of their S2, but mostly their S1 devices and variants of it, was something they will never have again. You'll never see these design patents asserted again. In reality, maybe, but it's a weak claim, because you had really a situation like the perfect storm where you had trade dress, you had all these design patents, you had these early software patents on some of the features that were lined up perfectly with all these first generation kind of S1 devices. You're not going to have that. I mean, you don't have that anymore. So I mean, Samsung themselves they've moved past it. They're not doing it anymore.
Right. Well, not in this version, this iteration of the iPhone and Android competition. But if Apple, if in September, October, whenever we see the new iPhone, they come out and they're like, we have a whole new iOS for you. iOS 6, we've revamped the whole thing.
It'll take them 5 years to get those patents, right? I mean, it takes a long time to get a patent. So, I mean, Matt's also right in that Apple put up Steve Jobs stood on stage and said, here's the iPhone, boy, have we patented it. And he meant those applications are all pending. Like, we've applied for them before. And nobody knew what Apple Patent 381 list translation on a touchscreen display meant until the iPhone came out and they said that's bounce back scrolling, right? I don't think they can do that anymore. The climate is different. Everybody reads the patent applications on every Tuesday and goes nuts over them. And B, they're not leading up to some huge category-killing device like the iPhone again. And I think you even saw that a little bit with the iPad, right? They had the iPad design patents, and the jury said, no, that's not. You can't say another black rectangle infringes that. You can say it about the Galaxy S2 or the Galaxy S that looks exactly like the iPhone.
Which is flagrant.
Yeah.
I mean, flagrant. All right, David, do you want to veer?
So where I get confused.
Oh, I just remembered something. One last point.
Uh-oh.
I have heard from a few people that Google believes Jelly Bean solves all of its patent problems with Apple.
No,
I don't know if it's true.
Does it? Not the unified search.
This is a perfect segue into what
not
I
the universal
wanted to
search is. I don't think.
No,
well,
Jelly
they could be
Bean
wrong,
did.
but it's apparent they tried.
What?
Yeah, and actually, it was
check.
ICS. It was ICS that had the universal search and it was banned, and then they updated it with Jelly Bean and it came back on the market.
Wait a second. I'm going to find out, okay? Because I've got a Jelly Bean device here.
Yeah, I don't know, but this is what I
search. I'm going to search for Nilay and see what comes up.
Well, so while he's looking, my question is, what does Google do now? Because I've seen, even as this has been happening, a lot of people saying, like, this is
definitely
bad for
universal
Google.
search on this.
There we go.
I mean, no question. Like, if I search for eBay in the search window, I get ebay.com.
I like that you searched for eBay.
The eBay. Well, I wanted to find something that I'd have an app and that you'd find online.
Yeah,
because that's what you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
So
I just heard,
and it has a link out to search the phone.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they changed the latest version of Jelly Bean to fix it, right? I mean,
I don't know.
I'm just saying I've heard. Anyway, David, go ahead.
Well, so
I'm not gonna. Don't nail me to the wall on the patent thing.
I'm nailing you to the wall, Nilay. You just got nailed.
That already happened.
Enjoy it.
Just
I hope you're
right now.
enjoying that nailing.
So what does this mean for Google? That's my primary question. Like, everybody's talking about this as an iOS versus Android debate, and it seems to me that
Google makes Android.
Right. I'm saying I don't get the sense that it is an iOS Android debate. Like, the big thing here was devices, and even the software stuff.
Well,
was,
they can't.
Like, I'm looking at this patent thing, and it's
but these are
square or rounded rectangles.
Right.
Like, this is TouchWiz.
Well, but
this isn't Android.
No. This is TouchWiz. This is not Android. Those are not the things in Android that they're concerned about. Which is why when they go after HTC for whatever the universal search is or the tap to dial a phone number, those are specific patents.
Yep.
And they're
so the next piece,
they're trying. They don't want to go to Google with a big case of all these things. And I'm sure.
No, they could have. They didn't. Yeah.
What's that?
I said they could have and they didn't. They clearly don't want to.
Well, Google doesn't get paid for Android, right?
No, but you can still get
So what would the
inducement.
damages be if you didn't make any money off of the devices that Samsung sold? Or
Well, I think they make more money.
this-
They could prove damages through ads and things like that through Android, right?
it's
Through
a
the App
much more
Store.
complicated
Yes,
case, though, isn't it, than saying like,
Yeah.
"Hey, Samsung, you made a phone that looks like ours. You
Well,
you
keep
made
in mind,
$200
Oracle,
on it.
right, you made $200
Oracle
on it.
just tried to. Oracle just tried to do this, right? I mean, they sued Samsung for, or I'm sorry, they sued Google. Oracle sued Google for copyright infringement, patent infringement on Android, and they had to make up a damages amount, and they struggled, right? They put up a bunch of numbers, and the jury was like, "We don't believe you." I think this case changes a lot if it's Apple versus Google, and I think, like Matt is saying,
Yes,
Apple's never
yeah.
going to have it this good again, right? They're never going to be able to say this copied us this away again. They're going to say this technical feature of Android copied us, or this UI element of Android copied us, and Google can design around it, and that's fine. But at this point now, they have to go after the core pieces of Android. They can't go after these interface tweaks or these hardware designs because the companies are going to be too smart to fall for it.
Yeah,
I
no,
think
LG, Google, HTC, Motorola, nobody's going to create those documents that Samsung created ever again.
Well,
I mean,
only an
those
idiot would create those
side-by-side
documents.
comparisons was a.
I'm sorry, but
huge-
you gotta admit, Samsung should have known a little bit better than to blatantly. I mean, Paul actually made a great point about this in the podcast, but on the Vergecast a couple of weeks ago. But it is one of those things where they weren't like, hey, they're doing this, like we should do something better than this. They were like,
They said, "We should do
they're
this."
doing this.
Exactly.
Hey, designers, they're doing this. Can you do this?
Yeah.
Can you guys do this?
Yeah.
But it is like the paper trail is a mile long. It's 100 miles long.
Yeah.
If they just had said it out loud, they'd be all set. No, I'm honestly, if they didn't have 141 pages of like how to copy the iPhone,
Yeah.
I bet you I have a feeling this jury may have found differently.
Well, and
You
that's,
know?
that's
Oh yeah.
That was a nasty. When I saw the thing,
I mean, that was
until
dude's closing argument.
up until that document, I was like, Samsung might have a case here, that they did kind of independently riff on some of this stuff. But when you saw that document and there was just like, here it is, now how do we make it? It was like how any human is going to look at that and go, I don't buy it. I don't buy that Samsung didn't willfully, knowingly copy what Apple was doing for personal gain.
And Apple's closing argument was, you've heard a lot of witnesses, you've seen a lot of stuff, but you should just look at the documents and look at this timeline of phones before the iPhone and phones after the iPhone and use your head. And they did. That's what I'm saying. I think they decided Apple won and they filled out the form. I think the bigger question for Google is, how do we stop this? And I think the bigger question for Apple is, how do we stop this? Android isn't going to go away. Apple can't sue Android
Are you
out of
sure?
existence.
I mean, are you sure? I mean, if they scare enough
sure.
of I'm just saying, if they scare enough of the manufacturers and they start looking at Windows Phone and going, actually, we don't have to worry about this stuff and we can make really nice devices and basically, given all the crazy licenses we're now paying, it would kind of cost the same.
I hear BB10 is great.
Come on, let's get real here, people.
Maybe.
No, but
I don't
I do
think-
think,
I'm sure it
honestly,
infringes,
I mean, Windows Phone 8, big improvements. I think we just ran a report today. Chris ran a report. Is there room for a fourth place? And you see Windows Phone starting to creep in with market share. I mean, I think that Google's got to do. They've got to get all their ducks in a row, and they have to ensure. They have to say to their partners, this won't happen again. We have protections.
Well, Josh, you've been saying, they do have to, that's what Microsoft says to its partners. If you license our software, we'll indemnify you, or at least, we'll pay the vast majority of your bills if it's our software that's the problem.
Right.
Google's never said that to anyone. Again, under the table, everybody thinks they're paying for a Quinn Emanuel to represent these firms, but that's not the same as putting it on paper,
Right.
But I think the bigger. I don't think Android's going away. I don't think it should go away. Josh, you've been saying this thing over and over again. Like the age of partnerships is kind of over.
Yes.
And I think that's really sad. And I'd like to see.
I agree.
This bring us back to Google and Apple working together.
I said this. Weeks ago when we were talking about the Maps thing, and I said, it was so cool that you could get the iPhone, the Apple product with the slick UI, with Google's great Maps product on it, and I feel like as every. We talked about this at length, but as every one of these companies tries to create you've got to own the entire ecosystem end to end. You do lose something of I think there's some real value in having the variety and having the choice of different, these people being able to partner on things. And I don't know if
But
it
don't
brings
you
us
think
back to
Google
an age.
and Apple will end up there? I mean, because if you look back at the Microsoft and Apple case, Apple got spanked, and it ended up in a license agreement that, for whatever it was worth, allowed both companies to operate how they do now. So I don't think there's any indication. It's early. I mean, I don't think there's anything that keeps Apple and Google from eventually getting there.
Except,
I think,
yeah.
I don't think Google's going to. I don't think Apple's going to sue Google. Only way those two are going to end up in court is if Google makes it happen.
And we don't have any indication that they couldn't make it happen.
Hey, I mean, are you sure? Because Google owns Motorola, and Motorola sued Apple yesterday.
Well, they all deal with each other indirectly through Motorola, right?
What was the?
I mean,
I
guess you could call that Google versus Apple.
What was the suit?
It's a case of the International Trade Commission. I mean, it's
actually there's news on this right now.
No, those are old patents. I mean, this is like
okay.
It's just kind of like amazing. It's like yesterday Google sued. Motorola can't do what Google doesn't want it to do. Right? Google owns Motorola, so Motorola sued Apple for 2 more patents. Google knew about it and said it was okay. And then today, Motorola's old case with 2 other patents got tossed out by the ITC, which actually breaking news, and like Matt and I should go hit it, but who cares, right?
If you have to go and hit the news, I can just say, it is 9:25 on the East Coast on a Friday night, and we've been talking about this legal stuff for a while. And by the way, when we started The Verge, Nilay was like, I want to have killer legal coverage of all the stuff that's going on
we all fell
in
asleep
technology. And we fell asleep. We started snoring. I mean, he didn't even finish the sentence, and we were snoozing. No, but Nilay's like, I want to do this. I want to cover this stuff. And we've been covering. We've had, I think, incredible coverage from Brian Bishop and from Matt and Nilay, yeah. And the whole team has pitched in. But these guys are really leading it because they know what they're doing, and we're just pretending. But right now, our traffic is like off the charts.
Yeah.
I mean,
Chad is telling me, by the way, that we have a ton of new viewers because our post was on the front page.
Apparently, it's on the front page of Reddit. So hello to Reddit. But we also had to shut down the live chat on this.
Also, hello Reddit.
Hello Reddit. and apparently 9gag was somehow involved in this. But
so let's just, for all the new people, let's recap.
Yeah, let's do recap. Okay, I'll give a quick recap. So if you're just joining us, here's what's happening in the world of technology.
Hello, Cincinnati. You're coming live.
Yeah, hello, Cincinnati. So the verdict has come down in the Apple versus Samsung trial just a few hours ago. The jury deliberated for about 22 hours, which is not a long time. They had over 30 questions, ultimately 700 different answers they had to give in places where, to answer whether or not Samsung had infringed on Apple. And they predominantly, I'd say overwhelmingly found in favor of Apple. This is a win for Apple. They're awarding. They've awarded Apple $1 billion. What is it now? 49.
$1,049 million.
$1,049 million
and some change.
And change. And there are only a couple of places where they didn't find for Apple, particularly in the whether or not the Galaxy Note 10.1 infringed on the iPad design.
No, the Tab. The Note's
brand new.
Right,
the Tab. The Galaxy Tab. The Note is the new one. The Note just come up with better names, that wouldn't be a problem. Samsung and Apple have both issued statements. Samsung, the gist of their statement is this is horrible for American innovation, and Apple's statement is this is great for American innovation. And we're glad that the jury saw that we had obviously been ripped off. And that's have I missed anything in the update?
No, that's it. I mean, the question is,
and we've been talking about it for the last hour or so, trying to make sense of it. And actually, Nilay's got a great piece on the site. If you haven't seen it, it's the title of it is "Apple Decisively Wins Samsung Trial: What It Means," where he breaks down kind of what it means really.
So I have a purely like procedural legal question.
Yes.
How significant in all of this is the willfulness stuff? Like if they had found that you made the Galaxy Ace, which I've now decided is the phone that looks the most like
you mean the one that you cited earlier as the phone that you think didn't look like it?
I don't recall saying that.
You're like, remember the Galaxy Ace? I don't know what the problem is with
That's
that.
the first one
that phone looks normal.
But so if they had found that infringed on the patent, but couldn't like that it was somehow completely unintentional and that was just the only way to design a phone, how different would this trial have come out? Like how important was it that Samsung had these documents?
Willful, it was like an accident.
Right, and especially going forward. So how important is it that these documents existed saying, like, look at the iPhone, let's build that exactly?
That's like the jury would still. Well, no, it's the jury would come up with a number, and then the judge wouldn't be able to triple it if she felt that the elements of treble damages were met.
Right.
So I mean, it's really important because now the judge has discretion, and also when the jury was coming up with its initial number, they're not supposed to think about willfulness, but Apple's lawyers were like, if you just slap Samsung on the wrist, they won't change. They did this on purpose. Look at the documents. They've got to pay the real money.
So, but it's not supposed to factor into that initial decision.
No, it's just out there to it's a notice to the judge that we decide it's willful. Now you take it from here and just determine whether or not you're going to increase the damages. I guarantee you, if the jury was allowed to decide willfulness, this damage award would be much higher. Yeah. They're not, though. I mean, and the judges are very reasonable. And triple damages it's egregious behavior that usually warrants that kind of increase. But I'm not so sure the code doesn't have a little bit of I don't want to say justification, but
Samsung didn't behave itself.
No,
Samsung did not behave itself.
But she also asked the Apple lawyer if he was smoking crack. So it seems like
I'm not saying Apple behaved itself either.
No, she doesn't think she thought anybody was behaving themselves.
Look, between the two companies, they filed over 2,000 objections in this case, which is like paperwork at 3 a.m. that the judge and her staff.
Oh, really? Judge Coe is in the robe at the office at 3 a.m. like writing something.
No, I'm saying they're filing the motions at 3 a.m. in the court's like electronic filing system, and then the judge and her staff of 4 shows up, and there's a new stack of motions.
I'm sorry. So, Matt, your suggestion is that the judge may want to be vindictive towards Samsung because they filed too many objections?
She may want. Yeah, I imagine that's not her take on it, but
I mean, that's what I read from what you're saying. Like, Samsung pissed her off.
Well, it's weird. You're right, though. There's this aspect that, you think willfulness is like, okay, it's the acts of the defendant. If they did something wrong, they copied with bad intent, then they should be punished, and maybe that's triple damages. But what the law allows for is basically the judge's the parties, Samsung's attorneys, if they acted wrongfully during the litigation, that's a factor, which is nuts, really. I mean, you shouldn't impose a sanction or a punitive damages essentially on the party because their attorneys are, jerks.
Well, it's designed to make them settle. I mean, the whole goal of the structural nature of the legal system is to make people not go to court. It's to say you're in a conflict, you're adults, you're sophisticated billion-dollar companies, you're paying a lot of lawyers, you should be able to come to an agreement. And if your lawyers are going to parade around saying you're going to win and file 2,000 motions, we'll be able to increase the damages against you. I mean, it's not necessarily the right structure, but it's the structure.
Here's a little update that we just had a post go up. That the next step in Apple versus Samsung preliminary injunction hearing on September 20th. What's that?
It's actually a permanent injunction. That would literally be the injunction that they're trying to get based on the verdict that would.
Oh, wait, this would not be preliminary, but this would be.
No, there's nothing preliminary about it.
We need to change that headline.
Probably.
Somebody tell Dieter he's messed up bad. So wait, what would the injunction be?
Right now, for instance, the Galaxy Tab had the injunction, which is now going to be lifted. But there could be injunctions in place for these other products that were found to infringe, including S2 variants that exist, right? Neil, I mean, you guys know I'm better than I do, but there's S2 models being sold.
There are S2 models in the market.
There's S2 all over the world. I think Cricket or Leap or somebody in the United States just put out an S2. I mean, they got problems.
Boost just announced it like last night.
Yeah, Boost. Okay,
what did they announce?
The Galaxy S2 4G.
Oh, God. Make it stop. Can that even be upgraded to ICS?
Probably not.
I hate Android.
TouchWiz is good.
I'm going back to the iPhone. At least they'll update it. Damn it. Go on. I'm sorry.
But that's an important part of this case. I mean, if you think about if all Samsung came out of this with, at the very end of the day, worst case scenario was, paying out between 1.05 million and $3 million. That's really not that big a deal I mean, it's real money, but it's Samsung and they have a lot of real money. So, but if they had an injunction on products, so the worst case scenario on the injunction side is that you get an injunction on all these models. And really, what percentage of these models exist? And if they exist now, are they going to exist in 6 months when the injunction would probably be in place? Because they're going to brief this thing for the next 2 or 3 months trying to figure it out. So I really don't. I don't see injunctions being an issue. I really don't see this case affecting innovation, affecting the market that much, because all the other products that we're talking about that people care about, like the S3 or the Nexus, are in the other case. And they're going to trial next year, and they got to go through all this again.
I mean, we're going to be back. We're going to be back doing the same thing next year for the universal search and the well, let's just say for the universal search.
Yeah, that's the one patent they got the injunction on for the Nexus. Yeah,
I mean, wouldn't they just be highly encouraged to settle at this point? I mean, wouldn't
yes, they should settle. Like, but I mean, without question.
Well, but again, if Apple wants like ridiculous damages that don't make financial sense, if they know they're going to get hit with, well, it's going to be, if this was trade dress and all of these patents, a handful of patents, and the damages were 2.x billion, then what's it going to be for the universal search? I mean, how high could that? Especially, aren't they specifically going after the Galaxy Nexus as a device?
Well, there's more patents in that case too. Yeah, they are. The S3's in that case, but it wasn't part of the injunction because it didn't come out in time. But in that case, you have other patents. But just like this case, the preliminary injunction stage, when they got the Nexus on the injunction, doesn't include all the patents in the case because Apple kind of picked and chose the strong ones that it felt were strong and they had the best chance at. So when they get to trial in next year on that case, they're going to have a whole slew of other patents. But they're not design patents. They're not trade dress patents. They're wonky software patents. And I'm not sure that's going to really. They're not going to be sitting in this position. They're not going to. I think it's really, this is the case that kind of is the peak possible opportunity for Apple. And I agree that they should use that as leverage to settle. My problem is that I just don't know. I mean, because really, no one's settling this case on either side without a blanket settlement that takes into account every single case around the world. No smart company, no board of directors is going to sign off on a settlement that doesn't take into account every single case and get rid of everything.
Right.
Yeah. And that's a lot of money, and I can't imagine Apple's ever going to accept a settlement that doesn't have a huge amount of money coming their way.
Right. But I mean, but as Apple just said in a statement, this isn't about money.
Yeah, I was a PR guy.
Well, I know that. It's actually Katie Cotton who's the head of the head of their PR.
Oh.
But I mean, but the statement is they're saying it's not about money, but Apple doesn't need Samsung's money. Isn't this about competition? I mean, isn't this really about saying like we want people to, if we have to have, I mean, let's just say if we take them at face value, isn't this about them saying we want to compete, we want you to compete with us fair and square. And if you don't compete with us fair and square, and if you hurt us, we're going to take you to court and we're going to be awarded damages because we deserve that, but we don't need your money. Aren't they saying like we don't want to be stolen from? And for future companies, if you want to create a product that competes with us, great, go for it. But don't steal from us or we'll take you to court.
Well, except that they went, they obviously went, even Steve Jobs, and Tim Cook went to Samsung back in 2010 and 2011 and said, they say these things, but in reality, there's a dollar amount that'll get them away from the courtroom.
Right. But a dollar amount that Samsung didn't think they wanted to pay.
Yeah, but they might start to think it looks a little better now.
Well, but didn't we just say? But didn't we just say? I mean, what's the impact to Samsung here? Is it the Vibe is impacted? Like, by the way, there may be a Samsung phone called the Vibe, so that's not what I mean. But
the impact is one.
Also, there may be one called the Impact.
Impact.
Yeah. So
I'm sure there is.
The
impact is a little over $1 billion. Not a little over $1 billion and $50 million.
Yeah, a little over. It's a little over.
Yeah.
No, it is. I mean,
it's a lot of money.
50 million more is not a big deal.
It's $1 billion. That's the impact. And
the Samsung Vibe.
The Samsung Vibe is a real phone.
Is a real phone.
Just so you all know.
In case you're wondering,
of course.
Samsung.
Well,
Vibe.
The Samsung already also made like the Galaxy Rant or something. I mean, they're all over the place.
No,
and then there was the smiley face. You remember the smiley face?
Yeah, it was just an emoticon.
Yeah.
But so what I'm saying is like Apple doesn't need their money.
No,
I think they want to stop.
But Samsung presumably needs their money.
Samsung needs their money very badly because they got to pay Apple. But what I'm saying is Apple. Okay, there are two things they're saying out loud. They're saying one, we don't want to be stolen from, and no, they're just saying one thing, we don't want to be stolen from.
Yep.
And so if that's what they're saying, I mean, I guess they could clean up. I guess they want to clean up on damages. Seems like a roundabout way to get it. I mean, they could have. Does it seem likely they could have struck a settlement that would be more money in their pocket? That seems likely too. Seems like in that case, Samsung Samsung are the guys saying we don't want to do the settlement because we're only going to lose, $1 billion here, or $2 billion, and we can afford that. Am I crazy?
And the thing that seems really odd to me,
I don't mean to belabor this point.
No, but it also seems like from Samsung's standpoint, money aside, because both of these companies have a ton of money and can afford to pay $1 billion in damages.
Well, yeah.
But from purely just an appearance standpoint, the vibe, as it were.
From the vibe
for
this.
Samsung to come out, it seems like the best thing to do would have been to come out and say, listen, we screwed up. Like, here are the documents that proved we tried to copy the iPhone. But now we have these other great devices. We've moved forward. Here's some money. We're sorry, Apple. And we have these great devices we've innovated beyond the iPhone. That would have been a good line. They should have stolen it from that guy.
Right.
And now let's just all move forward and be happy about it.
Right.
And it doesn't seem like... It seems like Samsung had nothing to gain.
They're never going to do that. They're never going to say they were ever wrong about anything. What they're going to do is they're going to either fight about how there was a miscarriage of justice, they're going to fight about how the patent system is broken and Apple owns a rectangle. And if they ever settle, they'll say, we're delighted that we both can continue to make our innovative product.
Right. Samsung's not going to say, Samsung is not going to finish the trial where they've been arguing about how right they are, and then Apple wins and they go, well, we were kind of wrong. We were out of line.
No, they should have done this a long time ago.
I'll be honest with you. We were out of line and we shouldn't have ripped off.
They should have never done it. They should have never done it. I mean, look, these companies should have settled. The judge has been telling them to settle. And what the jury has accomplished is it came up with a business deal for them to be a part of, right? And if they had been smart, Samsung would have been paying slowly this $1 billion to Apple over the past 2 years, iterating its devices, and Apple would be, it's still silly to me that the jury returned a verdict. It's a slam dunk for Apple in many ways.
Wait,
it's a huge sweeping
it's silly
victory.
to you that they returned a verdict? That was their entire job.
Well, no, but it's silly that Apple and Samsung ever let it get this far. I mean, it's still stupid.
But look, I think you're missing something very clear, which is Apple presented an emotional case to them with a lot of great evidence that struck an emotional chord. I mean, I think we felt an emotional response when we saw the document where Samsung said, do this, take this, make it more like this. And I think they knew at that point, I think they felt very strongly, and after seeing what Samsung produced, whether or not they discredited their witnesses, that they had made an emotional point that would resonate with the jury. And that what would happen is the jury winning looks much stronger for Apple than them settling with Samsung. Settling with Samsung in the midst of this trial, I think Apple is saying, there's stuff on both sides. We get it. We want to make things work. What they've done now is position themselves to the public and to future combatants in the courtroom as the company that won. The company that was found to be right. The company that a jury of regular people said, these guys were right, they got hurt, and they should be awarded something. And I think that's like a much stronger position to be in for Apple than having settled in the midst of this. Now, they may decide in a week or 2 weeks or in a month or whatever that there's a settlement out there that makes sense to them. But I think the emotional impact of letting these people decide for them sends a really big message to like the rest. Look, here we are talking about it. There's would this seem as important had they settled? Settlements happen all the time, and these companies make part of their business is figuring out how to get something from another company and keep making their product. I mean, they do that all day, every day. But to hear someone say, "Samsung, you stole from Apple," really vindicates them and shows their position in the market now where like, hey, average people can see it. An average jury was able to see we got ripped off. And I think that makes a powerful statement moving forward. I think it gives them a lot of leverage they wouldn't have had.
So who do they settle with at that point? I mean, it has to be Google, right? They're not going to settle with
It has to be Google.
Only Google. I mean, the truth is these are all about, the design of the Ace and the S, whatever the Vibrant aside, this really is, and the Tab, this really is about the software, and it is about two big companies trying to do the same thing, which is own the smartphone market and the smartphone ecosystem and the mobile market in general. I don't see how they can settle. I mean, I guess they could cut individual deals with all these
They
companies.
don't care about
little.
HTC. They offered Samsung a deal that was, I think, unique to Samsung.
I mean, how quickly could Apple buy HTC?
Yeah.
I mean, how much is HTC worth? Do you know what's the value? What would HTC sell at? Do you know?
Hold on, let me consult the chart of HTC's value that I keep with me at all times.
Yeah, can you just get that out?
Yeah, we'll wait.
Don't you have an app on your phone that shows the value of all companies? But I'm just saying HTC is not Apple's problem. Samsung has been Apple's problem for real. I mean, they really are a monolith in the mobile industry right now. They were the leader.
I would.
What? What have you identified HTC's market cap or something?
Yeah, HTC's market cap just lost, quote, hundreds of millions of dollars according to economists.
You mean like right this moment? I
think it's somewhere in the $30 billion range.
$30 billion. Apple loses that in a seat cushion. Okay, $30 billion is like
Tim Cook has a very big calculator.
That's like when somebody's got a birthday at Apple, like a regular employee, they spend $30 billion on their birthday party. So I mean, I'm just saying, I agree with Matt. I don't think HTC is the problem, and I don't think it's Google. If Google's driving Android, if Google's decided tomorrow to stop doing Android, Apple wouldn't have a problem. They'd have to worry about Microsoft again, or RIM.
But keep in mind that Apple and Microsoft have a deal. They worked it out. You know, they have an anti-cloning agreement in their deal. So that, you know, like, you're right. If Microsoft suddenly turns into a huge player, Apple can say, you're violating our anti-cloning agreement. But there's so much at play between the two companies that they would just adjust the terms of the deal.
Right.
And I think that's really important. You know, I think the Nokia case, you know, Apple and Nokia sued Apple, right? And then they settled. Like, Apple was a huge threat to Nokia. They're using a bunch of their patents, and they figured it out. Apple paid the money. And I think ultimately this comes down to Apple might have been strident. They might have been going for this victory, but Samsung decided at every opportunity to not pay the money. And maybe Apple's demands were too high, but Samsung made a choice. They also went to the jury. They said, we're going to win. And they did not win. They lost. This is absolutely categorically a loss for Samsung.
Yeah, I can almost guarantee that Samsung's not Apple's not asking for $30 a phone anymore. That was 2 years ago. I bet it's significantly lower. I mean, it's still high.
You mean for these phones or for phones going forward?
For just generally a license agreement under any sort of agreement, because they're doing a cross license for the whole portfolio.
I mean, what are they licensing at this point in an ICS device?
It doesn't matter. As far as Samsung's concerned, they're just getting an entire free ride on Apple's portfolio, and Apple gets Samsung's portfolio. So no matter what happens from issued patents or current patents that are pending, they don't have to worry about being a target.
Oh, so you're saying that the agreement, the settlement here is you pay us money, we both agree to not sue each other.
Yeah, no one's going to settle otherwise. I mean, you got to have some sort of assurances that you're not going to get nailed again.
So when they were, is it your perception that if they were in settlement talks, that what they were talking about is we've got to zero this out, like we've got to make it so that we're not going after each other? Or when they were in settlement talks, was it Apple is saying, hey, we want you to pay us X, Y, and Z, and we'll evaluate you down
there's
the
a
road.
slide we have from 2 years ago that said Apple presenting to Samsung, and it says, Samsung chose to embrace and imitate the iPhone. We worked hard on it. We would have preferred you got a license in advance. Cool. You know, like these talks have been happening. And that's what I'm saying. This is underreported in this entire case, is that they've been having constant talks about settlement.
I mean, what's funny about it is that if there had been any inclination that Samsung was going to copy, let's say, really blatantly copy Apple's product, or if Samsung had come to them and said, like, hey, we're about to release this, and Apple had seen it and said, you're ripping us off, you're going to have to pay a license on that, or you're using our IP or patents or whatever, they would have just changed it, wouldn't they? I mean, they would have just said, it's not worth the trouble. Why don't we just tweak this? They wouldn't have paid it, would they?
Who knows, man?
I mean,
maybe they would have designed around, but
right, so what you want exactly, which is what they should have done.
Well, they didn't immediately, because they had these phones. I mean, when they went to Samsung, it was just the Galaxy S, really, and really, I don't think much of the design rounds came until. I mean, they started peeping. I guess they started creeping up after that, but I mean.
Oh, so you're saying I'm sorry. You're saying earlier, and I don't know the timeline exactly, but earlier in this process. That when the original S was out, Apple came to
It's like
Samsung and said-
immediately after
they
that,
said
right?
they said you're infringing. Here's what you need to we need to settle this, right?
Yep.
And
Yeah.
they said no, and then they went on to make. Well, I mean, the S was pretty egregious.
Yeah.
I think they did start making changes after that.
Physical design changes.
Yeah.
I don't think they started making software changes right
They
away.
kept working on that big document.
Yeah.
how to get it.
Yeah.
They're like, have you seen the latest update, the iOS update? We gotta.
10 more pages.
They changed the icons a little bit. We gotta fix that. We gotta fix this.
All right. We should wrap this up. I
agree. We
talked
should
this
wrap up.
stuff.
I think we've talked this thing to death. So if you have joined us or are not brought up to speed, I'm just going to recap this and then we'll talk about what happens next. Very briefly. Jury found for Apple, predominantly for Apple, in the Apple versus Samsung trial. They've been awarded. At this point, the jury has awarded them $1,049 million in damages. It is possible that could be increased by the judge, or that Apple would. Well, it's possible that could be increased by the judge, and I'll leave it at that. The jury deliberated for about 22 hours, and it was. I mean, I think a very speedy, and no one was expecting this to come in tonight, as far as I know. Certainly, I don't think Matt and Nilay, our legal experts here, were definitely not like sitting around waiting for it to happen. And there's going to be an injunction hearing on September 20th in the case. Samsung is going to fight this. They're appealing is the point, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
there's more to come, but this is the state of the world for a long time yet. The next big question is whether Apple can get injunctions. We'll find out in the next 2 or so weeks. Whether Apple can get injunctions against the Galaxy S2, which I believe is the only product that's still on sale from this case. And then from there, it's Samsung has to decide what to appeal, and the court has to decide what appeals it's going to take.
Right.
That's where we're at.
Well, I think it goes without saying that we will be covering this intently. Well, I mean, what else are we going to do? This is what
My living nightmare will continue.
Nilay Patel's waking nightmare will go on for really an indefinite period of time, I would say.
Years.
Yeah.
He loves it.
For years.
He loves it.
But I will say that this wave, this swell, it will greatly diminish. I mean, we have been covering this like crazy. There have been so many developments in this. We've been live blogging it. This swell has now dissipated, and the surf is going out. I don't know what this water.
No, I mean,
thing
unless
is.
something crazy happens, like these
I'm
are
trying
the
to
answers.
make a water analogy. It's like 10 o'clock on Friday. It's been a long week.
You just want some water.
I just want some water. I'm thirsty. Okay, but we'll keep tracking this. Obviously, just keep your eyes on theverge.com for more action. And I want to thank David Pierce, Ross Miller, who was on for like 5 minutes and said one thing and then left, Matt McCary, and Nilay Patel, obviously.
And Brian on the ground.
Oh yes.
man.
Oh
Brian
no. We
Bishop.
should
Oh,
not,
yeah.
let's just say we could not overstate how clutch Brian has been in this reporting. He's been in the courtroom every day, live blogging this thing, putting together stories. Just incredible reporting from him. Very happy to have him on the team. And when I see him soon, I'm going to kiss him on the mouth, full on the mouth, open mouth, tongue. No big deal. We're all grown ups here. And he's earned it, really, when you think about
It's
it.
very possible that he is chasing a juror to their house right now.
No,
Yeah, we're
totally
they snuck out the back.
The jurors still.
Oh, really?
Yeah, in case you're wondering, the jurors
Yeah.
snuck out the back. We've not gotten any statements from the jurors or the attorneys right now. We'll be working on that, and we'll obviously have a post up when you see it. Thanks everybody here for who's tuned in, especially all the new Redditors. We love you, and you can come anytime you want. Come back anytime you want, and we will be back on the Vergecast this coming Thursday, as always. So that's our show. Thanks so much, and now go have a drink for the love of God.
Have a good weekend.
Yeah, and have a good weekend.